Brian, a bye week for Nebraska. What does a bye week typically involve in the recruiting world for a coaching staff at the college football ranks?
Well, I mean, typical's tough. Typical for a head coach would usually mean going out and seeing some commitments in the area, maybe checking out a top 2024 target, which is exactly what Matt Rule did. You try to be effective in the space, right? You want to go find a game, hopefully on Thursday, and then hopefully find something to do on Friday as well. And he did. I mean, he went out and saw, I think he went and saw Eric Ingerson on Thursday, and then was able to see Grant Bricks on Friday, and then got out to see Carter Nelson again on Friday as well. So you got to be, and that's a lot of ground for him to cover, right? Because he's going from Papillion to Iowa to Ainsworth, and Ainsworth is so isolated. It's really tough to kind of get out there. But yeah, that's what you kind of hope as a head coach. Then as an assistant coach, you may have some guys kind of circled, some guys that you want to go see in your area. And you want to get out there on the road. You might even have some guys that you've already had in for a visit before, and you tell them that you're coming back out to take a look at them later on, in the season, kind of like what Garrett McGuire did with Duncanville, Texas, and the trio of sophomores that they have offered there. But, Philip Simpson was in South Florida, and he made an offer to a Maryland commitment, a cornerback, and they had a couple other guys. I think they went out and took a look at. I think one thing that was, kind of interesting today is that they found a junior college special teams wide receiver down in Hutchinson that they offer today as well. So I think that they roughly know of some guys they want to go take a look at, eyeball, check out a game. But the head coach wants to stay home and try to cover as much ground as he possibly can in that limited time.
We're speaking to Bryan Munson of Husker Online, and Brian, when Strick and I talked to you last Monday, I asked you right off the bat about Kanan Lacy, and EJ Barthel went down to Lancaster and was hanging out with Kanan over the bye week. But I know there's a litany of SEC schools that are trying to steal Lacy away from Nebraska. I mean, I remember you telling me also that you were supposed to somewhat get in touch with him over the last week. I didn't know if you had any updates on Kanan Lacy, because that's one of the big ones that Nebraska, I think, is trying to hold on to right now.
Only his coach said that things were crazy. Kanan never got back to me. I'm going to actually see him on Friday night. I think he plays against West Mesquite, and West Mesquite's just kind of down the road from me. So I'm going to go out there and check him out for sure. And but I never heard back from Kanan. I know things are nuts. It's kind of like calling Carter Nelson on Saturday, right? Like you know that the dude is headed to South Bend, and things have got to be nuts for him anyway to have people trying to confirm a visit to another school. Yeah. With Kanan, it's just like you've got 12 some odd teams, I think is what he was kind of mentioning in the On3 article that ran last week with the SMU site. Schools like Alabama, Ole Miss, SMU, all pushing really, really hard to try to get back into the picture with him. And I know what he's told me before. He sees the bigger picture at Nebraska. He knows what he could do there. He knows he can step foot on campus and he can jump right into, being in the picture to play right away. So it would have to be pretty compelling. I mean, it would have to be a very compelling situation for him, I think, to go ahead and take a look around, because I just think that he feels like, with how Nebraska plans to use him, that he's got a very good fit for himself in Nebraska.
And that has to be the pitch, I think, with a lot of recruits, is that they're going to have the opportunity to come in and play day one. Number one, because that's kind of how Matt Rule has operated, I guess. But also, like Austin and I just had the conversation a little bit ago about there's not a whole lot of guys that you're sitting here on that offense specifically going, man, they need him back because he's such a talented playmaker and such a vital part of this offense, I guess.
Yeah, I think there's probably some truth to that. And I want to echo, what you said to begin with Matt Rule, just wanting to try and find ways to get guys on the football field. Look, we heard about it today. There's going to be 3 freshmen in the rotation, 1 guy starting that are all true freshmen this weekend against Northwestern. I did hear about it from Carter Nelson, on Friday a little bit, where he mentioned that Nebraska is going to be very, very creative with him when it comes to packages and formations and ways to get him involved. And it doesn't really involve like having that master title of being called a tight end. He's not married to that idea. He's married to the idea of trying to find a way to get on the football field and help the team win. And Nebraska has shown him that there's ways to do it, as kind of this hybrid, slot, Y guy that can get there and maybe potentially at some point plays more, can play some with his hand in the dirt. But realistically, he's more of a guy, I think, that Nebraska would love to leverage that athleticism and that frame, right away, because he's not a hand in the dirt tight end day one at Nebraska.
Sticking with the theme of the offense here, Bryan, Nick and I were talking too about kind of what he was mentioning there, but also just the balance between being a developmental program like we've heard Matt Rule wants to be, but also I think fans wanting to see some of these freshmen pop on the scene, a Malachi Coleman, a Jalen Lloyd, a Jaden Doss, guys like that. Is there a way for Nebraska to be developmental along the lines, but kind of plug and play with young, exciting athletes at the skill positions? Do you need to have some consistency across positions? What does that look like in recruiting?
Yeah, I think consistency is always what you're shooting for and you're striving for. I mean, if you're plugging and playing guys, I think it always kind of tells you that you haven't found the right recipe. You haven't found the right mix. You haven't found the right chemistry maybe between guys. Things have not gelled the way that you would kind of hope for them to, and you're still trying to figure out what that kind of percentage is and what guys are going to look right in what formation. So I think Nebraska is going to continue to plug and play, not because they don't have combinations necessarily. I think they're still looking for guys that can help. I think along the lines, I think the defensive side is a little bit easier of a spot to kind of go out there and plug and play and be a little bit more experimental, and you can kind of maybe tailor it more to strengths and what this guy can do well and what you don't necessarily have with some other guys, and maybe what you also feel like you can leverage a guy and get him some reps and continue his development. I think it's a little bit more difficult on offense because you want that ability to be able to basically do anything and everything all the time. That requires you to know the playbook. You're not going to have that ability to kind of rotate in and out, potentially as freely as what you would do on the defensive line. But I think at the skill position spots, I mean, obviously those guys are typically running a lot more on the field on any given down, and you're going to need to have that rotation and keep those legs fresh in the first place. So I think Nebraska really wants to find depth. I think they want to find guys that are having an impact within the numbers inside of that depth. And that's really what's going to stand out, I think, to the staff as the season goes along. They're looking for, guys that they cannot just find a way to win 3 more and get bowl eligible, even though it sounds like Matt Rule is really, really trying to get people's heads on to becoming, 1-0 for the week. And I really appreciate that. But I think in the long run, I think he's looking for guys that he can, start to feel like have a little bit more trust, guys that are believing in themselves. I mean, it's just not possible for Doss to kind of get there after just the limited time he saw in the first week. And I think they'll start to ramp up Lloyd. And I think Coleman, after getting that one catch, you'll start to see a guy really start to take some shape. At least that's what Nebraska is hoping for.
The last thing on the offensive side of the ball, we were talking a lot about quarterback too. How do you view this Nebraska quarterback room next year and for the next couple of years? Are they looking for a guy to bridge to Daniel Kalan? Are they going to the transfer portal? Do they just hope Kalan can be the guy from day one? Does Heinrich Haarberg factor in? How do you view the quarterback room and Nebraska strategy and recruiting?
Yeah, I mean, things get really, really interesting there. I mean, Haarberg, I think, is your guy that you have circled right now, looking in next spring and saying he's the guy, and Kalen's a guy that you had picked out in the 2025 class to come in there and add to our 2024 class to come in there and add to the room. And, you're hoping then that you have built this strong room, because I think the one thing that stood out to me so far, about like what's happened from Sims to the injury with Purdy to Haarberg stepping up and doing what he has done so far, they all seem incredibly close. And that is a very difficult thing, I think, for a lot of people to understand, because there's only one quarterback typically on the field at any one time. There's only one guy getting a snap, right? And that group of guys right there seem to be completely and totally vested in the guy that's out there on the football field. And I think that they're hoping that the locker room stays that way, that they need the team room to stay that way, regardless of kind of who's ever out there. And that they have ways to kind of be competitive during the week and be supportive of whoever the guy is playing on Friday or Saturday. So I think that's what you're kind of aiming for. And I think knowing Daniel Kanan and having a chance to talk to him quite a bit over the last year or so, I wouldn't expect anything less from him. I mean, that's a guy that's looking forward to getting in there and working with those guys and learning and figuring things out and getting to know the offense. So I think it's a good fit. And then you look down the road a little bit more like an Alex Mansky. I don't think Alex Mansky is, too far different or too different than Daniel Kanan in that regard either. I think he's looking to become part of a room, make it stronger, and go in there and try to get the room better with him being added to it.
Bryan, a big picture question for you here. Just with how much recruiting has shifted and changed over the last couple of years, obviously early signing day, a lot of guys want to get the decisions made, before their senior season rather than during or even after their senior season. What does the second half of seasons look like for official visits nowadays? Right. Because I think Nebraska loaded up a weekend in March. They loaded up summer weekends and things like that. And maybe even early parts of the season with games. But now it feels like we're having a lot of repeat of visitors, right, on unofficials. Carter Nelson's at every single Nebraska game. What does it look like for the visits look like for the second half of the season for Nebraska?
Great question. I mean, I kind of ran a story about that on Saturday about some guys I think that you could probably start seeing come through, here in the coming weeks. But you're looking for guys that I think Nebraska has offered, very recently, guys that I think there's still like Kanan Cook that hasn't taken his official visit as part of the class, right now. I think JD Crisp would be another guy that you would see come back, obviously, since he's took an unofficial visit and committed on it. So I think there's a couple of guys that are in the class that need to come back and take an official visit to Nebraska. But then you start talking about like Gregory Smith from Riverview, Florida, that picked up an offer from Nebraska a week and a half ago. Or you start talking about Larry Tarver, the cornerback, the Maryland commitment from Miami that picked up an offer from Nebraska last week during the bye week. Or Trey Richardson from Hutchinson Community College, which I just mentioned a little bit before this, who just picked up an offer today from Nebraska. I think you'll see a few more of those guys, kind of start popping up here and start coming in. Another guy I mentioned was like Andrew Dennis, the former Michigan State commitment that was part of Mel Tucker's class. He formally has now decommitted from Michigan State. I think it was a pretty well-known fact that he wasn't going to end up signing with the Spartans, or it was going to be very difficult to, knowing the coaching situation there at Michigan State, and maybe now Nebraska might be able to put themselves in a position to host him a little bit later on this fall too. But I think that there's some guys that are popping up, a lot of the later offers, which there hasn't been that many of them, but Nebraska's been very effective, at least there. And it sounds like them wanting to get to Lincoln, following the offer from the Huskers.
Bryan, anything else you're monitoring over these next couple weeks with back-to-back home games for Nebraska?
Well, I mean, I talked to Grant Brix last week, and, nothing really has changed there. I know a lot of people are dreading some of the predictions and forecasts that have been put out that indicate that he's going to OU. I did not get that idea talking to him last Monday at all. Nice. I think Nebraska is very much still in the picture there. I don't think he's going to take any visits, but I think that could pop, maybe at any moment, honestly, that he could end up, deciding where he's going to go or announcing where he's going to go ahead and go. So monitoring that, obviously the Carter Nelson thing remains a little fluid, but as Dad indicated last night, he's still very much solid in Nebraska, and he'll be at Nebraska this weekend to see the Northwestern game. There
you go. It's Bryan Munson of Husker Online with us here on our Allo VIP line. Bryan, appreciate it as always. Keep up the good work. We'll talk next week.
All right, guys. Take care.
I want to just say this on Grant Brix really quick.
Yeah.
I get it. He's a big name. He's very highly rated. A lot of good schools after him. How many times are we going to talk ourselves into one offensive lineman fixing the class and the whole line. We did it with Benhart. We did it with Corcoran. Here's the thing. I get it. It's interesting. He's a big name, but at the same time, he's one of 5. He's one guy. He'll make his decision when he makes his decision. It
is a big one. I also think with Grant Brix, that is, unfortunately, he's been in this real, just quiet, close to the vest type of mentality ever since his recruitment started. I think he's definitely one of those guys, and I think we've seen it, that wants to make the decision on his terms, and he doesn't want a ton of interviews, doesn't want to have a whole lot of conversations, doesn't want to really take a whole lot of visits. And he's just playing it very close to the vest. And it feels like it's between Nebraska and Oklahoma, right? That's what, and Kansas State's in there as well. But I mean, I think it is understandable. Number one player, it reminds you a lot of Turner Corcoran, which Husker fans might get scared from. Number one player in the state of Iowa, right? Corcoran, obviously from Kansas, but like number one player in the state of Iowa, number 3 interior offensive lineman in the entire country. Like, they see those numbers and they get excited. And that was part of my question, I think, because you normally nowadays especially see a lot of high profile guys like that, highly rated guys, still uncommitted at this point. Maybe you see some that are uncommitted, but because they decommitted. That's not Grant Brix's situation. And so you're seeing him play it real close to the vest, real quiet. And as Bryan says, because I asked him about Grant Brix last Monday, he obviously mentioned him today. Every single time, it's just, hey, he's real quiet about it. He's not giving a whole lot of hints. He's not really giving a whole lot of information. It could be any moment here. And when every single guy that talks to Grant Brix doesn't really have a read on when it's going to happen, likely is they don't really know when it's going to happen. If it's not getting leaked one bit, then it's very, very likely it's not going to happen. So, or we don't know when it's going to happen. Sorry.
That's just it. Big thanks to Bryan Munson of Husker Online. Check him out on 3 if you want to read more. We have him on every Monday here at 3.